Back in the day, I used to play in a band and we were touring all over Europe. I would build websites from the back of the van, filling Wi-Fi from McDonald's. That was way before 4G. It was extremely challenging. That was my first kind of understanding that something is broken. Creative collaboration as a whole.
The worst feedback, make it pop. That's the worst thing you can say because it's unclear. It's not strategically aligned.
If we approach giving feedback in exactly the same way that we approach prompting, I think we'd all be way better at being understood by others. AI is training all of us on how to give quality feedback.
Vito, how long have you been involved with feedback and websites?
I've been dealing with creative website feedback for almost 18 years now. Back in the day, I used to play in a band and we were touring all over Europe. And I would build websites from the back of the van, filling Wi-Fi from McDonald's as we were driving past on the Autobahn. That was way before 4G. So it was extremely challenging to do remote work, especially creative remote work, literally on the road. That was my first kind of understanding that something is broken. Probably the way that everything was set up was broken for me at the time. And that's when I realized that there is something off with creative collaboration as a whole. And that was before people got into remote work and all of these kind of stuff. So I've been thinking about this for a very long time. Only started actioning things around this for the past 6 years though.
That's great. So I think what's interesting, and you can really feel this in the DNA of Atarim, is you've dealt with feedback as the agency owner. Well, actually as the designer and developer, and as the agency owner dealing with clients.
Yes.
And also obviously WP Feedback as a platform, within WordPress for feedback. And now Atarim, where you're taking feedback on not just websites and certainly not just in WordPress. Right. And one thing that we were talking about quite recently was the way feedback is given. Because feedback is such a critical part of Atarim and what we do, you've got pretty scientific about feedback, haven't you?
Yes.
Talk to me a bit about that.
As part of the process of structuring our AI implementation, I try to take it back to first principles and understand what is feedback. How does creative feedback happen, or how does any feedback happen as a workflow step by step? And this was an interesting exercise to go through after serving more than 200,000 websites through our platform over the past few years, allowing others to give feedback to each other and with their clients and stakeholders. And just going back to the basics of what are the steps that create high quality feedback. And there's not only patterns within the creative space. What we found is, as we kind of mapped it out, is that this applies to any type of practice. Anytime that you want to make something better, you would likely go through these processes and steps to provide high quality feedback. And what are those layers? First of all, there's two ways to go into this flow. One is you want to get feedback, and the other one is you want to give feedback. Each one have different intent, and they need to have different skill sets to do that part of the game. If I want to get feedback, first of all, I need to be open to it, which is sometimes the hardest thing that...
Hey, all feedback is valid and equal, isn't it, Vito? All feedback is valid and equal.
100%. Even the dumb one, even the stupid points that are made are still valid when you're collecting feedback, for sure. Then it's on us to figure out what we should action and what we can skip. So the first thing is, if I want to receive feedback, I need to be open to receive the feedback. Let me open this up. This is really how feedback is done. And as I mentioned, there's two intents. You have, I want to get feedback and I want to give feedback. Each one of them have a different perspective as to how they approach the task. I want to give feedback. These people just want to come in and leave as quickly as they came in. They don't want to be bothered with anything in between. Everything needs to be ready for them to execute on the work, which means that there's multiple steps that needed to happen prior to them actually providing the feedback itself.
So what kind of people might just want to give feedback? We're talking like colleagues, clients, maybe that kind of people.
Yeah, exactly that. People that want to give feedback could be stakeholders, clients, team members, a manager that want to give feedback to one of the juniors within the team, and everything in between. Anyone that has intent, they usually come from a perspective that either they have better skills at the same task or they have different perspective on the work that is being delivered. So this is if I want to give feedback. If I want to get feedback, then I need to, first of all, provide some context before I invite the person. And that is what we did also with the AI in terms of the review intent. So apart from the project brief, so that you can run and create automatic project briefs in Atarim with a click of a button, and you can create a personalized brief for the project, looking at the work and trying to figure out what are the goals, what are the constraints, what are the opportunities within it, what are the brand guidelines, and everything in between, what does success look like, and and so that's step one. You got to have a brief. And then after that, once the person looks at a piece of work, and it's not only about creative work, we have that first impression, that first thing that comes when we look at a slide or a document or anything like this, or anything really that comes to our mind. And that bias that is generated in the first few seconds paints the rest of the review. If something looks off from the get-go, then I'm going to look at this with a bit of either a dismissive kind of eye or even more critical, depends on how my biases are coming into the game. But it definitely paints what happens next. And so the first step that we want to do is we want to, first of all, think about this from a first impression, think about the things zoomed out, perhaps more strategically. And that's exactly what Claro does when we run a review. The first thing they will do is we provide that strategic overview so that we can take it from there.
So just sticking on this first impression then, I think this is a part of feedback that's overlooked, right? Because a lot of the time it is that first impression that then just shapes all your other feedback. If that kind of zoomed out view, the first thing you take is that first impression. What you're saying is first impressions really matter and they are a critical part of that review process and you need to treat them differently. Is that right?
100%. The first impression that when we look at a piece of design or any piece of work really will allow us to understand how to approach the tactical bits. How deep should I go when it comes to the feedback that I'm going to be given? Are we in the last stretch, or are there fundamental things that needs to be changed in order for this piece of work to thrive? The strategic alignment and that first impression makes a whole lot of difference. Now, I might not agree with your first impression as the person receiving the feedback. I might want to have a place to voice my opinions. That's why a lot of times what you have is you have a project brief and then you have strategic alignment, right? You have a few team members joining a call together and talking about, all right, this is what we're trying to achieve. Here are the opportunities. Here are the stuff. Let's look at this from a zoomed out perspective for a second, from a strategic overview perspective, and let's discuss it. Let's debate and figure out what are the right things. Why are we doing it in this way rather than just diving into the nitty-gritty of things straight away. And that's true again across the board in how humans do this type of work day to day. It's always about starting with a brief, then aligning and debating what the ideas are, and then going on to execution, tactics, and all these kind of stuff.
Yeah, great.
And so this is exactly what we see here, where we've created, and this is not really how we started, but over time we've created a step where the user can talk to Claro and debate the strategic overview. Maybe say something like, "I know that you said that this image on the hero is not the right choice, but that's the only image that the client provided me, and he said that I have to use that explicitly." Okay, fine. Now we have a reason to do this. I tried to push back, but they had nothing else, or whatever, That discussion is important to give everyone context when they're going into the tactics. And that's really is what we call the deep dives, as they're going into each one of the viewports. That's the part where you're going into the finest details and you literally zoom in. So we structured the AI in exactly that same way, where it allows it to zoom in. And so you get the review coming from a few different layers. First of all, again, the project brief, then the review intent. What are we trying to influence? Better conversions, better SEO, better designs, and everything in between. Then the strategic overview and the alignment on what is right, why are we doing this in this way, and only then inviting the rest of the team to give their tactical suggestions right on the work, on the finer details. Change this word to this to improve the SEO.
From what it sounds like, then, with the inner circle, we've modeled this the way real feedback is successfully given, right? Because you zoom in, and then, you might need extra context, so you talk about it. And this idea of zooming in, having that dialogue, seeing if new ideas surface, giving extra context, that's something we've modeled in the inner circle, right? Tell me about that.
And that is really how we look at our entire AI implementation. And in fact, that's what all we've been doing for the past 6 years is we're digitizing human experiences. And so when it comes to how the tool works, it basically tries to mimic the concept of pointing at something and saying like, no, change this to this without needing to add many words and screenshots and links and everything like that in the background. Just point and say what you need. That's a human experience. That's how people have been giving feedback to each other for before there were computers, before there was the written word. That's like that human experience. But when we're going into executing on a workflow, we need to understand it from a different fidelity, and that still has all of these layers baked into it. So all of our AI, all that it does, it looks at what our users have been doing for the past 6 years with us. How can we help them do exactly that, but way faster and eventually with unlimited scale?
From your perspective, you've been handling feedback for 18 years. There's got to be some tips there and some lessons learned on making feedback work, right? What springs to mind?
Now it's a lot easier for people to give feedback because of AI. AI is training all of us, even if we're not aware of that, on how to give quality feedback. It's because the feedback loop is instant. You get a response to the way that you articulated your message straight away, which did not happen before in many ways of people through emails or Google Docs, or even inside Atarim, you would need to wait for another person to look at it in order for them to say if this is enough, to execute on. But the AI gives you that instant loop that allows you to see if what I wrote was proper. And so if we approach giving feedback in exactly the same way that we approach prompting, I think we'll all be way better at being understood by others. And the structure of a prompt, there's a video actually on how the pros are structuring their creative prompts. But at the core of it, you have to have the definition of what we're trying to achieve, what does great looks like, and not being vague about the message. It has to be actionable and clear in order for it to be executed without needing to do additional clarification cycles, which we also solved through the clarification tool, but that's a different topic.
The worst feedback, we make fun of this all the time at Atarim, but it's still a problem. It's make it pop. That's the worst thing you can say, right? Because it's unclear, because it means different things to different people, because it's not strategically aligned. What does make it pop mean? If you solve those kind of layered issues, then make it pop, the meaning kind of comes to the surface. I think that's what the AI does really nicely.
And I think that for us in the company, make it pop started having a meaning because we were doing it ironically in the beginning, but then actually we started having a common understanding of what make it pop means. I think that this is why these types of messages don't land, is because there's so many variables on how to execute. When the message is too vague, the variations are infinite. And so if you want to create consistency in the work, then you have to be very precise in how you describe what needs to be actioned. And we're helping the users do that as well, especially with clients. It's a pain in the ass. And so with Claro, in the same way that Grammarly checks for grammar, Claro checks for clarity for every incoming message from clients or stakeholders to make sure that everyone is understood by the other side. So it basically does that clarification cycle for you in real time, leveraging the fact that AI can have instant feedback loops.